Awesome. Let's go ahead and get started. So I'm Alex Klein. I'm a senior solutions engineer here at Sumo Logic, and I'll be going through the demo of our new Kubernetes solution today. Just a little bit of background on Sumo Logic for those of you that might not be familiar. We were established in 2010. We are deployed in 8 regions across 5 continents. We have over 2,000 plus customers and use our SaaS platform to proactively monitor, troubleshoot, and secure their apps and infrastructure. You can easily send any types of logs and metrics to the Sumo Logic platform, and they instantly become searchable, dashboardable, and alertable. Sumo enables world-class dev, security, and operations teams to accelerate their release cycles, harden their security posture, and of course, maximize uptime for their customers. And today I'll be showing kind of specifically with Kubernetes how we help achieve those results. So a bit of housekeeping before we get into it. We'll be sending the recording of the webinar to everyone after the session. Also, if you have any questions, you can answer them or ask them, I should say, in the Q&A. And my colleague, Abi Khanna, who's also on the line, who's a technical product manager for the Kubernetes solution, he'll be answering those questions. All right, let me go ahead and share my screen here. Awesome. So this will be we'll be pretty light on the slides today, mostly within the product today. So the agenda, we'll be going through the actual demo, kind of a Kubernetes troubleshooting scenario. Let me stop my video so you can just focus on the screen here. How to use our solution to find an issue, identify an issue, and get down to root cause. Talk about a lot of our pre-built apps in the app catalog, how to search data, how we're actually collecting all that data. And then we'll go through another troubleshooting scenario using the Kubernetes solution. And then finally, we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. Awesome. So let's just dive in here. Let me expand my screen a little bit. This is the Sumo Logic platform. This is our new Explore tab specifically made for Kubernetes. And let me actually show you how to navigate there as well too. You can just say New and hit Explore. And now this will show all the different clusters that you're collecting data from. So here in this case, in this environment, we just have data from this one cluster. This is our prod 01 travelogic.info cluster. If we had multiple clusters, we could see them here and explore them. But in this case, right, we just have the one. But what's really nice about this Explore view is it's very easy to navigate the cluster between the different entities, right? Obviously, there's nodes, namespaces, services within Kubernetes. And sometimes you want to look at your cluster in those different views, right? So if you want a more infrastructure-centric view, you can click on this Kubernetes node view. And then you can expand out your cluster and you can see, okay, hey, what are the different nodes? In this case, you know, EC2 instances, what are the different nodes that I have within my cluster? And then you can actually navigate to those specific nodes if you're interested in one, right? Maybe you get an alert that one node is running hot or something. You can come in here, click on that node, and then you can see all the different pods within the node. And then one thing you probably noticed is on the right side of the screen, this pre-built dashboard actually updated based on the entity level that I'm at, right? So I clicked on a node and then the dashboard updated automatically for the node focused dashboard, right? Because the things you cared about at the node level, right? Like a lot of infrastructure related metrics here, right? Like your CPU, memory, currently, right? And over time. And we got these nice new gauge visualizations so you can easily see if you're close to a limit, right? CPU, memory over time. Those types of things that you care about at a node level, right, are different than what you care about at a cluster level. So we can hop back up to the cluster level. We can choose, in this case, a namespace view. I'd say that's probably the most common view that customers use, right, and then probably service and deployment after that. And then here, we can also change the dashboard that we're looking at, right? So in this case, we're looking at a cluster overview dashboard, which gives you a great visualization of what's happening at the cluster level, right? And you can kind of navigate it to see the different KPIs that we provide out of the box. Everything that I'm showing here is out of the box. And this overview dashboard is a great place to start, but we also have a cluster explorer view, which again is at that kind of cluster level. And you can see information about the nodes and then the CPU per pod across those nodes, and then all the CPU and memory details for your pods sorted by the ones using the most, CPU and memory, right? Cool. So we also, one thing I should mention too, and I'll talk about it a little bit later, is we also have specific dashboards for like your control planes, your GKE, or if you're managing yourself as well too. So let's hop back to this cluster overview dashboard. This is my favorite dashboard. I think it contains the most amount of information. Here you can easily see information about resource utilization across the cluster. So how much CPU you're using across your nodes, right? We're only at 17% utilization. Maybe we're over provisioned, right? Maybe we're paying a little more than we need to. You can see the pods running across the namespaces in a really easy to understand honeycomb view. We can see namespace stats, so your CPU, memory, file system per namespace. And then one really important dashboard panel, the terminated and waiting by namespaces. So if a pod is terminated or waiting, it means it's not running, right? Which is generally an issue. So easy to visualize that. One thing to note, you can also alert off of any of these metrics as well too. So not only visualize, but obviously alert proactively. And then here, these are two panels that I like a lot. They show how much resources for CPU and memory the different namespaces are using, but they also show the limits. So limits are obviously very important to set for your pods. It's just good Kubernetes hygiene. One, from an operational standpoint, if you're not setting limits, then you might run into issues with certain pods using too much memory and CPU, and it affects the rest of your applications, right? But also I actually heard a story about an unsecured Kubernetes cluster that didn't have any limits set for their pods. And a malicious user actually got access to one of those pods, got into the pod and started spinning up Bitcoin mining resources in the pod. And since there were no limits set, they were actually able to do whatever they wanted, right? So not only from an operational perspective, but from a security perspective, just best practice to be setting limits. And we surface that information up to you very easy, right? And then here's more node stats across the cluster and what those look like over time, and pod stats. And then here, the same limits and CPU usage, but just across all the pods within the cluster in an easy to kind of understand view. So now we can talk about actually noticing an issue and then drilling down into that issue. So here within this prod loggen namespace, I see two pods are actually red. Each one of these honeycombs represents a pod, right? So green means it's running, red means it's not running, right? Simple to understand. So we can hover over this red pod, and then you look at the little tooltip, and you can see the behavior is it's flapping up and down. It looks like it's spinning up and then spinning right back down. And if you look closely at the tooltip, you can see on the second line, it says this pod equals carbon black. So it's a carbon black pod that's actually we're running in our cluster that's actually generating logs, sample logs from carbon black. So now we can use the namespace view to drill down into that pod. So we'll expand our cluster, and then I already know based on this dashboard that this pod is in the prod loggen namespace. So now I'll open up the prod loggen namespace, and then you can see again, the dashboards on the right update automatically for the entity that I'm looking at. And again, these are all pre-built out of the box dashboards that we're showing here. So this namespace view, I can see the pods running by deployment. And again, we see that same carbon black pod that we saw before, right? Labeled here. It's spinning up, it's spinning right back down, right? And then here's just some other information about the different entities and limits within the namespace. But in this case, I want to focus on, hey, what's going wrong with this carbon black pod, right? So I'll just click on this carbon black pod. And again, now my dashboard is pre-filtered for that specific pod. So I don't have to worry about, putting in any input myself. It's already there for me. And I can see this pod is in a crash loop back off state. The pod is, continually restarting. I could also look at those pod events here as well too. So really, what's what we see a lot with Kubernetes customers is they're troubleshooting issues. They're going into the pod and they're trying to run, or excuse me, the cluster, and they're running kubectl commands on the pod and things like that. Before they were using Sumo Logic, but now with Sumo, right, those same kind of commands that you would have to run to say, okay, hey, let me see the events, run a describe on this pod, those types of things, right, are all surfaced within one easy to understand dashboard here. And then if we scroll down here, we can also see the pod state over time. So we can see it's in a crash loop backoff state, it's spinning up and then spinning right down and staying in this crash loop backoff state. So let's see if we can see anything interesting about the memory. And here in this panel, we can actually see the memory usage, but also the limits. So you can see this black line is how much memory is actually being used. And then the red line is just the limits. And we're pulling all these metrics automatically as well too, right? So nothing you need to statically put in. The limits and usage obviously are pulled automatically. So here we can see that the memory usage spikes up. It goes above the limits, and then it immediately drops back down, right? And it has the same behavior, spikes up over the limit, and then drops back down. And then we have this really easy to understand panel called terminated containers by reason. And if we hover over this reason, you can see within the tooltip, it actually tells you the reason at the bottom line. The reason is it's out of memory killed. So this pod is spinning up. It's using way more memory than it should. It's going way over the limit. And then Kubernetes is killing it because it's using too much memory. And without even running a single, kubectl command, going into the cluster, or even, looking at a log, we were able to start from the dashboard, the cluster level. And if I go back here, right, just to reiterate here, start at this level, notice the prod loggen was having an issue, the carbon black pod, drill down into that pod. And then from here, it actually just straight up told me the reason why it was terminated, right? Which in this case was it was out of memory killed. Awesome. So I'm going to pause super fast there because I know I just covered a lot. And if you guys have any questions, go ahead and ask them in the Q&A, and Abhi will be able to answer it. I'm just going to take a quick drink of water because I've been talking for like 15 minutes while you guys can ask any questions. Awesome. So let's move on now to how to search the raw logs, right? Because a lot of times with the Kubernetes issue, the Explore tab and the pre-built dashboards are more than enough to find the issue, but sometimes you actually want to run some analytics on your logs or look at the raw logs. So here, if we hop to the collection page, we can see we're pre-filtered by this cluster, this Prod01 cluster, which if you recall here, right, we can see the name of that. So we're filtering by this collector, and then this collector we're sending logs and metrics to. And one new feature that we added recently was what's called custom fields. So these custom fields, you can do freeform tagging of your sources and collectors. In this case, we have a cluster field. So every log or metric that comes into this cluster will automatically be tagged with this field called cluster equals prod01. You could put custom fields in here as well too. Like you could say environment is prod. Maybe the team that owns this is our DevOps team, right? You could put any of those types of freeform tags as well too. So let's take a look at the logs from this cluster though. So to do that, I'll say new log search. And then what I can do is I can just use the cluster field. So I'll say cluster equals and put in this prod01. And then this will return all the logs for this cluster within the last 15 minutes here. Then what we're doing, which makes the searchability and findability, I guess, findability is not a word, but you get the point, really easy because everything, all the entities that are collected are tagged with that piece of information that it came from, right? So if it came from a daemon set, that's tagged. If it came, what cluster it came from, what container it came from, what namespace, and then you can just click on these and drill down into them if you'd like, right? What pod it came from, as well as any labels. So if it's associated with an app label, any charts, right? Whatever type of labels you are already tagging your Kubernetes entities with, we'll pick those up and those will be searchable. You can filter on those. It makes it a lot easier to know what you're searching for, right? So one example that customers have used is they'll actually have a label for the version of their application. So they'll say, okay, this is version, 5.1. They'll do a release and they'll say it's version 5.2. And then that's just another piece of data that they can use to search, but also do comparative analysis on, right? So you could say, hey, what's the amount of errors I'm having on 5.1 and compare that to 5.2, right? So any labels that you're using can help find the data, but also run different analysis on, right? So let's say in this case, I wanted to look at logs from my MongoDB pod. So I can just say pod equals, and I can just search the word Mongo with wildcards in there, and that will just return any log which is MongoDB pod, right? And we can see the container there, the container there as well as the pod. Then from here, let's say, hey, I want to do some basic analytics on these logs. I want to see how many messages are coming from this MongoDB pod. So what I can do is actually parse on the fly. So that's one really nice thing about Sumo Logic. I don't have to pre-parse my data. I don't have to, do any grok filters or anything like that before I send the data to make sure I'm getting value out of it. So right here, this is kind of an unstructured formatted log. It's basically just saying, hey, I sent X amount of messages to Sumo. So let's pull out this value. So to do that, I can just point and click, and I can just right click on this. I'll say parse the selected text. Now I have this prompt up here. I can say this is the value that I want to pull out. So I highlight where that value occurs. We're going to extract this value. We'll call it messages, and then just hit submit. And then it writes that parser for me. So simple as that. Just get the logs into Sumo. You can do point and click parsing, and then we're pulling out these fields now from each of these messages. Now the next step here is to run some basic analytics on this, right? Let's average the amount of messages. So I can see, okay, what's the average amount of messages that this MongoDB pod is sending? And we can see there, in this case, 28. But what might be more interesting to me is what does that look like over time? So to do that, I can just say, let's time slice the data into 1 minute chunks. So basically grouping each message into a 1 minute bucket. And then let's average that by time slice. And then this will show me per 1 minute bucket, what's the average amount of messages sent from this MongoDB pod. And then we can display this over time, right? See what that looks like. And then, hey, this is pretty interesting to me, and I also think other users would find this interesting. Let's add this to a dashboard. So we'll say add to a dashboard. We'll say, call it MongoDB messages. And then we'll add a new dashboard. We'll call it Klein's Cool Dash. For those of you that joined late, I'm Alex Klein, so this is my cool dash. And then we'll create it as one of our new dashboard frameworks. And then we'll just hit add. And then that easy, right? I have my own custom dashboard, which I can refer to later. Awesome. So again, the flow there, right, is we just made the search. We did point and click parsing, and we didn't have to do any pre-filtering, right? And we can still get value out of these unstructured logs. And then I added this to a dashboard. Now, I really like this Explore view. So maybe instead of just having the out-of-the-box dashboards, I'd like to add my custom dashboard to that Explore view. So it's very easy to do that as well, too. I will click on these three dots here, and I'll say create a stack linking. And I'll say, I want to see this dashboard, for example, at the cluster level. So we'll just say cluster, and we'll say anytime we're at the cluster level, I want to see this dashboard. And then we'll just hit apply. We'll make sure it's saved. And then I'll hop here and we'll say, let's open up a new Explore view. And then when I'm at that cluster level, we can go and see that same dashboard that I just saved, that Klein's Cool Dash. And then there you go. Not only do I have all those fantastic wealth of out-of-the-box content, I can also create my own custom dashboards, which I can navigate through in the Explore tab. Awesome. So I know I covered a lot there. I'm just pause for a second. You can ruminate on all the magic we just saw and ask any questions in the Q&A, and I'll just pause just for a moment. All right, fantastic. So a lot of what I've been showing was Kubernetes specific, right? And kind of custom searching and dashboarding, but we also have a wealth of pre-built content for your non-Kubernetes sources as well, right? Applications. So this app catalog is pre-built searches and dashboards for your various different, applications, OSs, cloud services, right? So you can get that instant insights into those different entities, right? So just navigating through the app catalog here, we can see, you can just go through them directly, right? You can filter by different entities, right? Hey, I just want to look for AWS ones, or I have a compliance need, and I know I have Carbon Black or Azure Active Directory. Once you have this data ingested, you can just add these apps, which give you those pre-built searches and dashboards. We have obviously a bunch for Kubernetes as well, AKS, EKS, and these different Kubernetes security products, web servers, right, what have you. And just to give you an idea of what some of it looks like, I opened up two dashboards from our AWS CloudTrail application. So this one obviously more security focused, but gives you an idea of kind of the out-of-the-box content you can get for some of these sources. So this shows, who's the location of any users in your AWS platform, created resources, deleted resources. And then here, this specifically shows, your console logins. And what's nice is all of these are just based off of queries. So if one of these is interesting to you, you can just open it up and turn it into an alert, right? Like, hey, I want to alert off of users who are logging in without multi-factor. Looks like Kevin is doing that quite a bit. We'll have to have a word with him after this. So I can open this up. Then I can say, hey, I want to turn this into an alert. So you just say save as, schedule a search, alert you in real time. And then you can be alerted via email, or you can do a webhook to, Slack or PagerDuty or OpsGenie or any of those monitoring solutions as well too. Awesome. So now I wanted to just discuss how collection works. So let's hop to the beautiful glossy collection diagram we have here. So everything that I showed back in the Explore tab, and let's just hop back there real quick so we can review it again on the cluster overview, right? A lot of the metrics and then logs that we showed, all of them actually are pulled with this collection solution, right? So there's 4 different data streams that we need to pull. The logs, which are obviously logs from your application or Kubernetes, written to standard out, standard error, your events, your metrics, and then security information. So for the logs, we're using FluentBit. That's running as a daemon set, obviously running on every node within your cluster. Then anything written to standard out, standard error, FluentBit will pick up, send to the centralized FluentD pipeline, which I'll talk about more in a second. For our events, we're using a FluentD deployment. That's just issuing a watch command on the API server and pulling events like a pod was killed because it was out of memory, like, right? If you remember that scenario we looked at before, that would be an event. So that's something we could easily pull and alert off of. Things like a pod wasn't able to be scheduled because, the container repository wasn't found, right? Those types of Kubernetes events that, when you run a kubectl describe pod and you look at the events, right? Those types of things. Then for our metrics, we're using Prometheus to collect those metrics. So these are like your CPU, memory, disk for the nodes and containers, as well as kube state metrics, API server metrics, like latency, etcd metrics. All those things are pulled with Prometheus. And we're essentially just using Prometheus as a collector. It was a natural choice for us for the collection of metrics because like pretty much all of these solutions here, it's approved by the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, recommended for Kubernetes monitoring. And Prometheus does a really great job of auto discovery, as well as the fact that a lot of things within Kubernetes already pre-instrumented with the Prometheus format, right? So a couple of things that Prometheus doesn't do exceptionally well is scaling and then long-term retention of metrics. So it was a good marriage of Prometheus for collection and then using Sumo Logic because we excel at scaling, right? Being a multi-tenant cloud platform, we can really send as much data as you need. And then also long-term retention, right? So Prometheus for the collection, and then Sumo Logic for your long-term retention. And then for the security events, we're actually using an open source tool called Falco, which does anomaly detection based off of pre-built and configurable rules. It looks for things like a process spinning up a suspicious child process, files being accessed that aren't normally accessed, right? Those types of security events. And then all of these things will then flow through this centralized Fluentd enrichment pipeline. And then what this pipeline does is tagging of these different data sets. So what service did it come from, what deployment, what namespace, what node, what pod, what container, and then it tags everything so that, like we saw in this search, it's very easy to know what this log belongs to and very easy to know how to find those logs. But then because everything is consistently tagged, the cross-signal correlation becomes very easy. So when I say cross-signal correlation, I mean, hey, we saw that a pod was running hot on CPU or memory. I want to go look at the logs for that. Well, that's very easy to do because the metric is consistently tagged with the log, right? And then everything is stored within the same platform. So that drill down across logs into metrics and back again becomes very easy. And I think you'll see that in the next example. Awesome. So let's highlight that example real quick. Hop back to our Explore tab. So here in the cluster overview dashboard again, right, in that prod loggen namespace, we also notice there's another pod having issues that's not able to start, right? So we hover over that and we can look at the behavior over time. And that's what that little chart is at the bottom. And you can see it's spinning up and then spinning down, right? A really similar behavior to this pod that we saw before, the carbon black pod that was running out of memory, right? So now what I want to do is actually navigate back to that prod loggen namespace. So I'll just click this, and then again, the dashboard is pre-filtered for that prod loggen namespace. I can, refresh the data as well. We could always change just so you're aware, we could always change how far back we look. In this case, we're troubleshooting at the moment, so we'll just look the last 15 minutes. And then we can see here, okay, that PagerDuty pod is actually what's spinning up and down. And this is a pod that is generating PagerDuty logs for our demo environment. So now I want to drill down and see, okay, what's happening with this PagerDuty pod. So we'll follow the same kind of flow here. We'll open up the PagerDuty deployment, and then we can just filter on that PagerDuty pod. And then we can see, okay, what's the reason why this one isn't able to stay up, right? So because we just looked at that carbon black pod and that carbon black pod was having memory issues, I'm kind of suspecting that it's the same issue, right? So I'll go and, we see the state over time. I want to immediately look at the memory. So we can see the memory usage versus the limits. And you'll remember here, the red line is our limits and the black is the actual usage. You can see the usage of memory for this pod is actually well below the limits. So it looks like it's not the same issue as the carbon black issue, right? It's a separate issue. So now I'm curious, hey, what's happening? Let's hover down, scroll down and see what's the reason that it was terminated. So we can hover over here and we see in this case, it's actually an error. You can see that at the tooltip, an error meaning an application error. So instead of Kubernetes is killing it because it's out of memory, the pod's being killed because it's running into some type of error, right? So this is a great scenario where, hey, I need to actually look at the logs. So like I mentioned before, since we have that, if we look at this diagram again, we have that consistent metadata tagging between my metrics and my logs. I can look at a metric and I can say, let's go look at the logs associated with this same pod, right? So I can click on this and then I can say all logs, and then that will instantly do a drill down into the logs for this PagerDuty pod, right? So now I want to see, okay, what are the logs that are happening? Is there anything jumping out to me? So we can look at the logs down here. And I'm just scanning here. And I see, okay, this is pretty interesting, a Java IO exception. If we look at the message, it's unable to determine the collector API URL, and the status code here is 401. So now I know Okay, it looks like it's unable to authenticate. As we all know, 401 means unable to authorize. So it looks like this pod is trying to authenticate to the Sumo Logic service. It's getting a 401, and then it's getting killed. But I'm kind of interested in why it's unable to authenticate, right? So let's kind of navigate a few more logs in here from this pod. And we can see, okay, the access ID is actually logged here. So it looks like it's able to set the access ID, but then for whatever reason, it's unable to authenticate. So let's see if there's any other logs for this access ID. So what I can do here is I can highlight this access ID. I can say, hey, I want more information about this. So I'll add the selected text as an OR, and then that will add it automatically to my search. And I can say, let's just expand the scope here. Let's look back an hour. So now I'll rerun the search, and we still have, logs from the PagerDuty pod, but I'm curious if they show up anywhere else. So in my left here, I can navigate the different fields, and I see, hey, there's actually 2 source categories that show up. So I can click here. And then as you guys know, source category is a piece of metadata used to help identify where the log came from. So we'll notice within the 2 source categories, there's one for Kubernetes, which is expected. But what I also see is actually an internal audit log from Sumo Logic as well. So I want to navigate into that because that's really interesting to me. Maybe that has more information about this access ID. So now it pre-filters it for that specific Sumo Logic audit log, and then I can look at the logs and I can see, okay, what happened to this access ID? And if we look here, we can see the user, this user from our SOC team actually successfully disabled this access key that our pod was trying to use, and then immediately deleted it. So what looks like happened is this user, for whatever reason, maybe the access ID was leaked out, he deleted the access ID, and as a result, our pod that was trying to spin up and use that was unable to authenticate, and as a result was being killed, right? But very easily, I was able to notice, hey, it was an issue actually with the application, and then drill down into the associated logs for that. Fantastic. So now we saw 2 different scenarios of using our Explore tab in Kubernetes solution to find a more Kubernetes specific issue with the pod using too much memory, and then also an application issue. So one other thing that I want to discuss is, how to get the most out of the Sumo Logic platform. So to do that, we have a few different resources right at your fingertips. We have this Learn tab, which has all these quick start videos within here, little micro lessons about keywords and metadata and searching and data collection. And then these hands-on labs that anyone can take, links to our documentation as well too. This is a great operator's cheat sheet with more information about all the powerful things you can do with the query language. And then we also have this fantastic certification section, which is courses and then certifications, excuse me, about the Sumo Logic platform. So you can take these to quickly become a power user. You have the fundamentals, search mastery, administration, and even a Kubernetes specific certification. And these are all included within the product for all our customers at no additional charge. So any of your users can go in here, log in, and take these certifications and get the most out of your Sumo Logic investment. Awesome. So I think the last thing too, I just wanted to mention, just to kind of fully cover what you can do with Sumo Logic from a Kubernetes standpoint, is not only navigate and collect information from your CI/CD pipeline, right, like your Circle CI, Jenkins, Harness, all these things you see here, but also obviously the actual Kubernetes platform and what's running in it. And then any of these different security sources like our pre-built Falco integration, and then any other Kubernetes and container security partners that you may be using. Fantastic. So that pretty much covers everything I wanted to discuss. I think we have a beautiful question slide here. So if you guys have any questions, just go ahead and ask them in the chat, and Abhi and I will try and respond. Thank you, guys. Abby, did you want to answer the question around Helm?
Sure. If I understand the question, there was a question around, there's a Helm chart. It describes Fluentd, Falco, Prometheus, Fluent Bit, as Alex is showing here on the screen. Basically, Helm is a packaging system for Kubernetes. So we've created a Helm chart that packages all 4 of these with the right configuration to send your metric security events, and logs into Sumo for all that information you saw that Alex was showing as part of that demo. There was another question from Eric Sherman on, if getting started, which dashboard have you seen today to be the biggest bang for the buck / quick win? Alex, do you want to take a crack at that one?
Yeah, I would. In my opinion, I think it's kind of dependent on the use case, but I think the cluster overview gives you the most information across both infrastructure as well as kind of the Kubernetes application itself, right? So you get the nice information about, hey, how much mem and CPU utilization are being used. From an infrastructure standpoint, you can also see errors by namespace, and you can also drill down into each namespace as well, which I like a lot. So very quickly you can see, hey, maybe one namespace is having a ton of errors. You can just click on that and say, let me see the logs, and then again, right, it's pre-filtered for you. And you can also see security rules, but then also you get the nice honeycombs around the pods running. So I'd say, yeah, for me, cluster overview is the one that I always start with, but that's what's so nice about the Kubernetes app is there's a ton of different dashboards that you can take advantage of. Awesome. So I also see a question. Let's see. So a question from Matthew. I'll answer this live. So a DevOps team currently shipping Kubernetes logs to Datadog. Would you assume we can use the same routing for a collection in Sumo? Would we need to do more of the enrichment step first? So yeah, I think probably we would just also, what you could do is you can actually spin up a trial today and then set up collection. It's a really easy installation process just using Helm, and that will send the data to Sumo Logic. Since I think Datadog kind of tags the data differently, and I don't think they have an ability to send directly to Sumo. So yeah, you would probably just in conjunction run your Datadog collection with Sumo. Awesome. Another question, if we have sensitive data in our logs, can we mask them before getting into Sumo? So I'll answer that one live. Yes, you can. There's a couple ways to do that. Well, actually, really one way I think that makes the most sense, what's called processing rules. So per source, you can set up a processing rule, which is just in here to say, hey, we want to hash or mask different parts of a message. And that's just based off of a regex. So you can just write a simple regex for, like hopefully credit card is never in your logs, but write a simple regex for your credit card, right? And then that will just look through the logs as they come in, and then you can mask it with redacted or something like that, right? Awesome. Great. So I see a question, the security dashboard a bit, security events. So I'd assume that's specifically within the Falco collection, right? Which is, again, a piece of what we collect as part of the Kubernetes collection. So we should have some data in here. Let me see if we have. I actually don't know if we have live data in here for, let me see, did I just miss it? Yeah, I don't think we have I don't see it in here for the security overview, but essentially it just shows you all the different rules that Falco can trigger. Things like I mentioned, someone executing a command within a cluster that's unexpected, or within a container that's unexpected. Processes being spun up, as child processes that are suspicious, right? Those types of things. And I think we can send out more information around Falco as well, too. Awesome. Avi, was there anything else you wanted to add specifically that you want people to know about the Kubernetes solution?
No, I think you covered it all. Let us know if there's more questions and we'll happily answer them. Otherwise, Alex, I think I'll leave it with you.
Awesome. So yeah, we'll just keep the webinar on just for a couple more minutes in case any other questions come in. But if you guys got to run, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
There was a incoming question around the AWS view. I think we'll send out some more information around that potentially afterwards as well.
Awesome. And someone asked about getting an access to the recording of the video. We will send out a recording to everyone who registered. Ron asked, how long is the free trial? By default, it's 30 days from when you spin it up. And also part of the trial, we can help you kind of set up collection, make sure that you're getting everything you need out of the solution. It's monitoring all the KPIs. We'll help you set up the alerts, all those types of things we can help you with during the trial. Let me actually probably should bring up the link to it. Yeah, and to sign up for free trial, you can just go to sumologic.com/sign up. If you just Google Sumo Logic free trial, it will come up. Awesome. Thank you, guys.